from the very beginning, it's pretty clear that human beings and what we might call the animal kingdom has a very tight kinship. Um, and over the years, it's been the case that we have this ability to domesticate animals. Animals that spend time around us become quite a bit more like us in ways that otherwise would just not happen. You think about even the horse as an example of something that essentially runs wild and free, um, bringing it to a point to where horse and rider become essentially seamless. A well-trained horse, and the process of breaking a horse is quite extensive. But eventually it ends up with a saddle and a person on top who essentially becomes a vehicle. And this did great things for us. I'm sure that long ago, when we realized that some animals were able to be domesticated, we were thrilled because it's such an advantage. And, you have situations like birds making these beautiful songs, and they can eventually speak human words. Obviously, not with the same veracity and intention, but nonetheless. But as unfamiliar as the animal kingdom might seem at first glance, we share just about everything. The one demarcation line would be, of course, abstraction. The sort of thinking that we bring to the table is what is the clear line between us and the rest of the animal kingdom. But aside from that, we share just about everything. And the same can be said about what happens within us. Because you can compliment somebody by saying they're an animal, and you can also insult somebody by saying they're an animal. And you would know exactly what I mean when I say that, because when you want to insult someone by saying they're an animal, it's implying that this person has little to no control over that part of themselves. They display behavior that is essentially instinctual, permanently in the moment, reactive, way too emotional, yet quite alive. And a person who doesn't have control over this part of them is going to end up in trouble for the entirety of their lives. And while relationships will be tight and bonds will be tight, they will be difficult, because the ability of abstraction for this person is not that powerful. And everything that we do in life is going to involve the harmonious activity of that animal aspect as well as the abstract or sentient, you could call it. Because on the other end of the spectrum, you can speak of somebody who is too much on the other end, who has almost no contact with that animal part of them, who might even look down on it. And this person, their relationships will not be that tight, but they will be logical. This person seems maybe distant and a bit cold, hyper-rational. Feels, but emotions are just as much trouble for them as the person who is too animal. And somebody who has the ability to let that part of them go, as well as has adequate powers of abstraction, is going to appear and behave and act and look like a well-adjusted human. This is a person who has that raging source that is part of the animal kingdom under control. This is a person who can conceive strategy, comprehend strategy and overarching strategy, logistics, planning, as well as apply it in the moment. Who can take out a sword or a weapon, or who can defend themselves, who can connect and understand other people on a more intuitive level as well. This person has the ability of foresight, has the ability to see the varying connections that are applicable as they come, as well as physically apply themselves. And there are a myriad of things across human life. This is all day, every day, where these two things come together. And you could say that somebody would have a lack of restraint or not enough discipline who is permanently sort of in an animal state. But we all harbor half a beast and half an angel, you could say. And in a way, we domesticate each other. We give yeses and nos. We reward certain behaviors and we condemn others. And we connect and bond, as well as comprehend the magnitude of those connections and bonds. And if you even think of a sport, I always go back to sports because they're really a perfect place to describe a lot of what's going on elsewhere. In a sport, you have a play-by-play activity. You have a strategy, as I was saying, but you have to be able to physically use yourself and apply it in the moment as well. When it comes to romance, you have to comprehend another human being in an abstract way, as well as physically connect with them as well. You have to be able to plan your life and strategize and know how to connect to somebody in a deeper way. And the degrees to which we can connect with other people has more to do with our specific makeup as well as theirs too. Plus this sort of animal slash angel component within us. And it's the divine half, or whatever you might want to call it, that comprehends things like justice. If we had no comprehension of that, if somebody did somebody wrong in some way, we would just kill them or immediately take out vengeance in some way. And it would just be a completely different scenario. I mean, if you think about having the ability to enter a courtroom, I mean, this situation is so interesting because you've heard about some of the most heinous crimes that people have, committed. And you have the families sitting in a courtroom and the accused sitting there and a jury and a judge and the lawyers and everything. And as emotional as they are listening to the evidence, they still kind of respect the process and the system and let it play out. That's a highly non-animal situation where at the same time the animal is just kind of surging underneath. It wants to just go and just be loud and even attack the accused. You're just on the edge. And it's an interesting situation because you can see in real time this domestication type thing in its one of its most raw forms. And in the end, we're going to respect somebody quite highly who can go through things like this. Obviously, things far less serious and extreme, and manage to maintain at the same time. Because there's always a time and a place. And you could call somebody well adjusted who has an adequate discernment of times and places. Sometimes you can let go and just be that animal, and other times not at all. Not at all. And a lot of life is bringing you through that dividing line. I mean, you need to be able to make love to somebody, you know. If you're terrible at connection and making love or having sex with somebody that you truly do love, then there's a good chance that you're not able to just let it go and sort of unleash that and be into that, you know. And a lot of people do have difficulty with that. It's completely understandable. And on the other end, when problems come up, a person can be completely unrestrained and just say anything and just do anything and just be completely out of control. And it just doesn't lead you to anywhere good. And pairs who have this sort of ability over themselves, that's why it's always the most important thing to at first master yourself before you even really enter into anything with other people, because you're just going to be a troublemaker, so to speak. You know, you're just going to cause yourself and other people problems. And we learn this sooner or later. You know, people call it things like fighting their demons, you know. People use phrases like this, but it's the same thing. And some people view even self-domestication or even domestication that is inspired by another person as a sort of giving up, or sort of like they're losing something, or something like this. But that is the abstraction that isn't quite properly tuned, because you can't fully become one thing with another person if you don't at least somewhat have this under control, or at least somewhat have the ability to comprehend somebody else in such a way that you're able to sort of let their existence domesticate those more wild parts in you. And this doesn't have to happen through force, actually quite the opposite. It best happens not through force. When you're able to realize that this is a necessity yourself. And these two parts of us aren't necessarily better or worse, you know. They're just different. And it's an integration, really. Jung talks about this a lot, integration. You could even call a lot of the animal in us the shadow, because it doesn't exactly take a specific form. It's more like the very animating force itself. And the other half is more like boxes and straight lines. It's more of an organized image. It's like the sun itself. There's a clear edge to the sun, but it's such a violent, radiating thing. But it's still very organized, very precise. And here on Earth, the natural world is just like that. And even when you meet people, I mean, to me it seems everybody has not even just an animal, but a specific animal, you know. Some people are like eagles. Some people are like lions. Some people are like snakes. Some are like sharks. Some are like whales. Some are like ostriches. Some are chickens. And that sounds maybe oversimplified, but even in our appearance and the way we move harbors very animal characteristics. Some people are predators, and not always the negative kind, because obviously that word has massive negative associations, but there's a huge array, even within that classification, that can be used quite beneficially, not only for the person, but for everybody else around them. And it is true to say that human beings, we share just about everything, all the way through to our senses. We share similar digestive systems. We consume the very planet that we live on for our own sustenance. We all breathe the same atmosphere. And for a very, very long time, we have looked to the animal kingdom almost with this sort of envy at times, because they do have this seamless connection with what is. That there's no lag, there's no buffering, there is no displacement of attention, there is no additional fat or waste to what an animal applies itself to. That's another way of saying there is no abstraction. There is no additional thinking in any other direction outside of what's happening. When an animal is hungry, it hunts, or it does what it has to do to get food. When an animal is full, it rests, and it thinks not twice about it, and it doesn't feel any kind of guilt. It doesn't say it should be doing something else. It doesn't wonder. It sees, and it does. But we have this additional layering. But that additional layering is such a beautiful addition, or at least it can be, it should be, has been, and definitely will be more as well, because that combination just so happens to be perfect for finding out what's happening. Animals just, they pay no mind to that. They don't care what's happening, you know. And there's a kind of beauty to that. That there's something about that we're like, yeah, you know, I get that. And it is that plugging in to us that we call enlightenment. It is so foreign to us to be so plugged in and non-abstract that we call it enlightenment. We consider it to be enlightened, to sort of unplug from the civilization you're involved in, and even the very organism that you are, and be able to seamlessly be what is happening in this place that we call here and now. We feel that as a unburdening, a detachment, but it's not a detachment from reality. It's ironically an attachment, but it is a detachment from the abstraction, the symbols, the representations that we use and see as a sort of screen across over what's happening. Because as we see things unfold, we also see what should be, what's about to be. And we have that juxtaposed to what was. And it just creates this whole other world. And that's always going to be our situation. And when you talk about integration, when somebody approaches you and let's say that they're a person who is integrated in this way, they just come across as aspirational in a way. It's like I've said, there's something that such a person just gets. They understand you, they understand themselves, and they're able to connect relatively easily. And not just with people, but the very circumstances they find themselves in, the world around them, as well as animals, because we have a very special kinship with animals. And we come into this world highly animal. No abstractions, no words. We cry immediately when we're dissatisfied. And slowly over time as we age, we become more in tune with the abstract. We go more and more and more. And then, over time, it seems like the abstract, commonly, at least in Western civilization, starts to win out a bit. And then a person has to go back to rediscover what they once had as a child. That sort of rawness. And that's usually the hourglass shape of a human life. And by the time a person is a certain age, both of these elements are unified. A person starts out as part of a family, part of a group, and slowly individuates away from the group, and in the end brings together both the group, which you could also consider society at large, and the individual, because it should never just be one or the other that a person is focused on. One shouldn't just be dependent on groups, and one shouldn't just be dependent on individuality, because any one of those two ends in its extreme is an incomplete person, a person who is lacking an entire 50%, and it's almost crazy how exactly 50% that can be. But within that 50-50, there's every imaginable variant and variation and sensation and possibility, every personality trait, every personality type, everything we could ever do, anything we could ever say or know, all of it. And it is, like it always is, synergy. The human being who is equally animal and equally angel becomes a third thing, which is a person at the peak of personing, let's say. You're not as human as you can be if you are too much of one or the other for too long, because sometimes you have to, as situations come and go, be more one than the other, sometimes fully one of the two. But as I've said many times in the past, you return back to center. That's you exist on that dividing line. If you look at it like a dividing line and two halves, and there's a little dot on the dividing line, that's you. And as the day goes, it's that little dot's moving, maybe a little bit more here, a little bit more there, and sometimes it goes way over, but it has to go back to center. You don't just stay in one end or the other. And for periods of time, even for years, you need to kind of be more on one side than the other. For example, if you're in school, And that's a long period of time for a kid. You know, going through school is a long process of becoming an entity of abstractions. That's the entire aim. And the kids who have the most trouble are the kids who just can't do that, who stay within that animal component, and they're constant disruptions, and they're just having trouble, and that they can't quite get to the other side. And some others go way over to the other side. They do fantastic. They're all about it. They get amazing grades. They completely get this whole education concept and the whole concept of abstractions, but maybe they're not athletes. And maybe they absolutely despise physical activity. They're allergic to it. But in time, that person goes through years and years and years of schooling and doesn't come out the other side and eventually come back, which is absolutely vital. Whereas another person may never breach that other side, maybe drop out of school, leave it early, and never even fully comes in contact with the world of abstractions. Because you're going to need both as a human. If you really want the full ride, the tippy top of human experience is complete understanding and much time spent in abstractions and using the symbols and the language and everything we've come up with and applying it to the real world and using it to comprehend and see the real world, balanced by as much time or whatever time is necessary to balance it spent in the animal world too. That they're both completely essential, and when the balance is struck, this little dot, it goes where it needs to go very naturally. There doesn't need to be a conscious effort to be more or less this or that, because as it turns out, actually knowing about the world richens and ripens and further informs the wealth of our senses and the ability of our sense to naturally go where it needs to go. So much so that the vastness of the world can be summed in a feeling. And if you're not well versed in abstractions, your feelings are very simple. They're very primal, and they're very, very basic, and they're wholly inadequate for the complexity of human life, human relationships, and fully comprehending the world. There's a small grouping there that is used to become applied to a near infinite number of situations that are all unique but similar. So it is this synergy of these two that ends up bringing about such a richness that you can trust how you feel. In the beginning, the way you feel is going to lead you in certain directions and grow certain results, and you literally find out the hard way how that works. You find out that you can't just start crying or shedding tears when the world and what you want doesn't line up. You learn that that's just not an adequate sensation for circumstances and your desires not being perfectly aligned. You learn that actually crying makes you less likely to square those two things over time. Maybe it's effective when you're younger because We kind of understand that we're simple yet. But as you age, obviously, you learn, and you also learn that you can't just bully people. Maybe you try that when you're young, because there's a simplicity there, and you find out the hard way that you can't just do that the whole time either. And maybe you completely cower or feel fear when situations don't line up. Maybe you feel that as a catastrophic failure, and it keeps you from attempting over and over any efforts to square reality with what you want. And that doesn't work either. So, over time, when we hit these walls that our sort of basic primal feelings bring us to, and they stop working. Somewhere in adolescence, that it stops working. And you see other people of your age, and they have to be your age. If they're adults, it just doesn't resonate quite the same as an example. Because in that relationship, there's too large of a gulf between a fully shaped adult and their appearance and what a younger person sees amongst their peers, because we have no comprehension of how they got there, and there's too large of a gulf to feel a connection on that level. So a younger person sees other younger people and how they do it. We see that somebody loses maybe in a very important game, or fails to spell the word correctly in a spelling bee or something in front of everybody, and they don't cry. They don't bully. Or like, oh, and it actually opens a door to get them further than where they were. They don't just sealing off in this oblivion that is a simplicity of feeling. They see that there's a more complex synergy or grouping of feelings that can come together that moves them almost through a door. And it gives you pause, man. You're just kind of like, okay, I see, And it has to be your peers. Same with when you're adults and you get older. It is interesting, because at a certain point in life you can start to really trust what you feel, because what you feel is a massive synthesis and consideration of a huge number of variables, not in a linear way. It's able to just hit you all at once. It's like when people say to trust that sort of gut instinct or gut feeling that you get. You just somehow know. And that is because you're able to take a wealth of memories and a wealth of experiences maybe you didn't even have. Maybe other people did. Maybe it's a simple story that you heard from somebody else. And it comes together in a feeling. And then once that feeling hits, your more abstract parts are able to analyze it a bit and sort of reason with its validity. Is this a valid feeling right here, right now? But that just comes with time. And it's something that we all go through. But it is a bringing together of those two main components. And we really can get quite a bit out of life on a day-to-day level. Things really can be completely brand new on one hand and the same on another. You can really do the same thing every single day and not get bored. If you're completely locked in the area of abstraction, everything looks the same, because the depth and complexity of reality is so much more rich than the symbolized, thought of and abstracted version that we have in our minds compartmentalized. It's like I said in the last video, it's the difference between saying somebody's name and that actual person. Every time a person approaches you, no matter how long you've known them, they're always approaching you with whatever it is in the world that they've accumulated since you last met. They're always very, very familiar, but not quite the same. And the abstract mind can't see this. They're always the same to the abstract mind. It's the same person and they're maybe boring. But on the other half, the animal mind has a sense that goes far beyond abstraction. But both are true. And it changes the way you actually, physically experience the world. And it really is a bit of a higher place. That's why they call it enlightenment, because it brings together the two primary components of a human being and makes them one. It's the oneness that people talk about. And in that oneness, the seamless way an animal moves and exists, we have complete access to. In fact, we are so completely tied and tethered to reality, we can be nowhere else. The only time and place we can be anywhere else is in abstraction, in our minds. But it's even more beautiful when you actually know about the world, too. Not just the animal level or just the abstraction level, when you can really just look around and be your organism and know about it too. It adds this layer of artistry, almost beauty. And we really don't know how far that can go. We don't. And that's why we're here. We're here to find out how far can we take this thing as human beings, as a society, as a civilization. And we keep passing the torch, so to speak, to the next generation. And I think it's important that we do so, And I'm sure most would agree. But more than anything, I think a person should feel on a daily basis these two parts and know where they're at in terms of this sort of tuning. And if you think of it that way, it actually makes it pretty easy. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to know if you're too animal. And if you're too animal, you need to enter the world of abstractions. Do it. Because in that, there is the most uncovered ground in you that you can gain. You can get quick beginner's gains. And this is what will deepen you, and I don't want to say change you, because it's true and not true at the same time, but it's the way to add the most internal geography quickly. And if you are steeped in the world of abstractions, it's the opposite. Get into the animal world a bit, because it's just the same for you. And you'll know this based off of your just simple day-to-day experience. How do you feel? How does the world respond to your existence? And you can tell. And honestly, if you're too far on one end, the other end may look highly appealing because it'll be things that are relatively foreign, maybe even beneath you. Maybe they've become things that you've rejected over the years because you would like to think of yourself as one or the other, which I get, you know. But both is so much better.